Imagine living in London in the early 1800s. Horse-drawn carts clattering on cobblestones. Coal smoke hanging in the air. Crowded streets packed with pubs and factories. You step outside for a normal day in the city, and a 15-foot wall of beer suddenly barrels toward you, smashing through buildings and sweeping everything in its path. This isn't fiction. It actually happened. This is the story of the Great Beer Flood of 1814, a disaster so strange, so tragic, and so unbelievable that many people today think it's a joke. But it was real. And the truth is far darker and much weirder than the myth. To understand this bizarre event, we need to step back into London in 1814. The Industrial Revolution was transforming the city. Factories were booming. Streets were overcrowded, especially in the poorer districts like St. Giles, one of the roughest neighborhoods in London at the time. St. Giles was a maze of cheap housing, narrow streets, and cramped living conditions. Many families lived in single rooms. Beer wasn't just entertainment. It was an everyday part of life. Clean drinking water was unreliable, so people often turned to beer as a safer alternative. And towering over this neighborhood was the Mahon Company Brewery, one of the largest breweries in the world. Inside this brewery stood something extraordinary. Enormous wooden vats, some as tall as a 3-story building, each holding more than 1 million pints of beer. These vats were held together by giant metal hoops. Or at least they were supposed to be. At the heart of the disaster was one vat in particular. A massive wooden tank holding over 610,000 liters of fermenting porter. This thing was a monster. So large that workers described it as a room made of beer. But it had a problem. One of the metal hoops around the vat had been gradually slipping, loosening over time. Workers noticed it. They even reported it. But the brewery's owner, Sir Henry Moe, didn't worry. The vats failed all the time. He said they were so huge that even if a hoop snapped, the vat itself usually held. And he had a point. These vats did often make loud cracks or bangs. It was considered normal. But on October 17, 1814, the vat reached its limit at around 5:30 p.m. The faulty hoop finally shot off the tank with explosive force, smashing into the wall with a sound that echoed through the brewery. Before anyone could react, the entire vat burst open. And when it did, it triggered a chain reaction that caused another vat to fail, and another, until a tsunami of beer was unleashed on the streets below. Over 1.4 million liters of porter, dark, thick beer, exploding outward in seconds. The force was incredible, like a dam breaking. The waves smashed through the brick brewery wall, sending debris flying into the neighborhood. The beer rushed into the narrow streets of St. Giles, where people had no warning, no chance to move. The poor district was especially vulnerable. Many families lived in basement-level rooms, and beer poured into them like a tidal wave. The flood destroyed everything in its path. People described hearing a roar like thunder, followed by screams and the crash of collapsing buildings. The beer swept through homes, pubs, and even a local funeral gathering. One house was smashed apart so violently that bricks were launched into neighboring homes. A mother was drinking tea with her daughter when the beer burst in, knocking them against furniture. Several people were trapped under collapsed walls. Others were swept off their feet and dragged through the streets. And in one of the darkest parts of the story, many victims were women and children, unable to climb out of basement rooms fast enough. The flood killed 8 people, and dozens more were injured. A devastating toll for a neighborhood already living on the edge of poverty. When the beer finally settled, the streets were soaked in the smell of porter. Rescuers tried to dig through collapsed houses with their bare hands. Some survivors were covered in bruises and cuts from debris. But what happened next is one of the strangest parts of the entire event. Crowds gathered, not just to help, but to scoop up the beer. People arrived with pots, pans, hats, even their bare hands, trying to salvage what they could. Remember, alcohol was valuable, and poverty was extreme. There were even reports of people getting drunk from waiting around in it, but there was another grim twist. Doctors had trouble identifying victims because some bodies were covered in beer. And newspapers sensationalized the tragedy, calling it a river of death. You might assume the brewery was sued, shut down, or held responsible. But in classic 19th century fashion, nobody was punished. A court ruled the entire event an act of God. The brewery didn't have to pay damages. No one was fined. No one was held accountable. The Moe Brewery continued operations for decades after, and the neighborhood? Most families received no compensation at all. It was only the generosity of local people, not the company, that helped survivors cover funeral costs. Over time, the beer flood became a strange mix of tragedy and urban legend. Some stories claim people drowned because they tried to drink the floodwater. Others say the streets smelled like beer for months. Some claim pubs ran out of beer for days afterwards. While many tales were exaggerated, the core event is absolutely real. A massive engineering failure caused one of the strangest disasters in British history. A disaster that destroyed homes. A disaster that killed 8 people. A disaster that turned beer, something associated with celebration, into a deadly force. So why talk about this bizarre event today? Because it reminds us how much of history is shaped by accidents, negligence, and overlooked warnings. It shows how a single failing piece of metal, one loosened hoop, can catastrophically change the lives of an entire neighborhood. And it shows us that even the strangest historical events carry very human stories behind them. Stories of loss, survival, injustice, and resilience. So the next time you raise a pint, remember the unbelievable moment when London was hit by a deadly, unstoppable wave of beer. History isn't always grand battles and political speeches. Sometimes it's a flood of porter smashing through a city. If you enjoyed this story and want more bizarre, forgotten, or unbelievable events from history, make sure to subscribe to Vault of Yesteryear. Leave a like and let me know which strange event you want covered next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.